Hey everybody, this is Andy with RS Xperience, and there's a lot of discussion and maybe debate going on right now regarding internal combustion engines and electric vehicles. I feel it's become like another labeler, identifier we're putting on people, like, hey, you're an EV person, oh, hey, you're a combustion engine person. And in this video, I'm gonna share my thoughts and opinions on this whole electric internal combustion engine discussion. Hey, I'm Andy, a high-performance car enthusiast with a passion for well-engineered automobiles. I love to drive mountain roads with like-minded enthusiasts, along with sharing driving tips and techniques in my Porsche GT3 RS and BMW M2 CS. EV versus internal combustion, a hot topic with a lot of passion regardless of what side you're on. If you prefer the ICE side, well then maybe you're accused of not caring about the environment or climate change. If you're on the EV side, perhaps it's you're following the herd mentality, or gosh, you don't know all of the pollution created in mining materials for EV batteries and what source are you using to charge those batteries. It almost seems like it's an either or process, where I believe more in hybrid thinking, and that is, how do we take advantage of the things that are good in EV and say internal combustion, and then minimize those things that are disadvantages. So I'm going to start with electric vehicles, and I thought I would just run through some of the things that I see. Remember, again, folks, these are my opinions. What I see are some of the pros and cons of EV. One pro, well, it's more environmentally friendly and it's cleaner. It's currently less expensive to operate than gasoline. You have that instant torque and they're fast acceleration. So like when you come up and I hit that gas pedal, phew, those of you that saw me do the review of the Porsche Taycan Turbo S, we'll put a link in the description below. You'll see how crazy fast that car was. They're loaded with a lot of tech, right? There's a lot of tech. They're very modern, sleek in their design. And I think currently there's probably less regular maintenance that you would have to perform on an EV. So cons are, and these are, again, for me, are, I think the designs are kind of funky, but are getting better. I think the Hyundai, what is it, Iconic 5, I think is a cool looking car. And then that new truck, was it Rivian? That's actually kind of cool. Another con is they're heavy. Right? I mean, some of these things weigh 4,000 pounds. And even with fantastic suspension and handling systems, you can't mask the physics of trying to drive a 4,000 pound, and I'm going to say car, very sporty, without you feeling it. You know, you want to turn, the mass wants to keep going straight ahead. There's no emotion. So the visceral feeling, other than that instant torque when you take off, there's no like visceral feeling. I don't know, maybe when they make EV convertibles and you can get the wind in your hair and stuff, maybe it'll feel a little bit more visceral. So that's a con. Currently, obviously, there's a limited charging infrastructure. They're more expensive to insure. There's data out there that says a combustion engine car probably costs on average $193 a month to insure, or an EV costs about $317 a month to insure. There's limited independent repair shops. And, you know, some of that's because, right, it's relatively new. I mean, most cases, I believe you have to take your car into the shop, into the dealer, to get it, you know, get some maintenance on it, as opposed to like an independent shop that's around. The other piece is the technology is ever changing. Battery tech today is old tech tomorrow, and potentially even obsolete in a few years. Now the question is, if our government's going to push EVs, would they even allow that to happen? And then lastly, I would not purchase an EV car. But there's a caveat to that. I would lease an EV car. And the reason I wouldn't purchase it is that in 3 to 5 years, you could be driving around in the equivalent of a Sony Betamax or a Sony Walkman, because depending on how that technology changes in that battery, like even if you get 300 miles today, what if in 5 years they're getting 700 miles? And if your car can't be retrofitted, you're sitting on a dinosaur that you can't get rid of. Those are pros and cons. Let me share some additional thoughts. And one that kind of I get a little about is this whole idea about range anxiety. Why are people so worried about range anxiety? There's data from the US Department of Transportation that says on average, most people drive about 14,000 miles per year. 90% of those miles are within 29 miles of their home. So I would argue that if you have an EV that's getting 250 or 300 miles range and you're only driving 29 miles from your house, you have like 10 days of driving. Even if it was 29 each way, that's 5 days of driving before you have to put it on charge. So where's all this anxiety come from? Oh, but Andy, what if I go on a long trip? I would argue that of the other 10%, probably half of that is probably no more than 100 miles from your house. And there's EV station at the other end where you're gonna go. So for the 5% where I'm going more than 100 miles, or it becomes a little nerve-wracking, well, it's just plan for it, right? One is you can look at the infrastructure that's out there and know where I might have to stop along my route to charge. You could have a second vehicle that is gas powered, and maybe that's the car you use when you go on the longer trips. 3, you rent a gas powered vehicle. You go to a rental agency and you rent a vehicle when you're gonna go drive, 600-700 miles or something like that. I think the range anxiety thing's a little overblown. A quick little tidbit on the infrastructure bill that was recently passed, which I think makes a lot of sense. We definitely need to invest in our infrastructure. I believe there was like $5 billion of that was to build out the charging network, if you will, across the country. I read an article that said that they're putting some parameters around how they're going to lay that out, how they're going to structure it, and I think they're getting there's like a comment period in there. So what I heard was that they were going to start putting this infrastructure along interstate highways is where they were going to first build it out. And that the charging stations would be between, I think, 50 and 70 miles, about 50 to 75 miles apart. The charging stations could be no more than 1 mile off of the interstate. So if you're on the interstate, it'll be within a mile, and that there had to be a minimum of 2 charging stations per location. So, I mean, it's a start, right? And that's good. I think, that's a good thing. I think longer term, I'm imagining that the big petroleum companies will get involved because we already have all this infrastructure with all the gas stations. So is there abilities, can some of them be retrofitted, or can you fit on, say, that property, the footprint where they're at? Could they fit in some EV stations there as well? So I'm curious if that'll also become a way to, get these charging stations more prolific across the country. There's another thought here that I have around this, and that is, so like we're going all in on this EV and on this battery powered car. And my question would be, are there other viable solutions? Or are we just going right off the edge of the cliff? It's batteries or nothing. So give you an example, hydrogen power, right? And there's been companies, I know Germany probably played around with this the most, to have hydrogen fuel celled vehicles. And then there's also some companies, Porsche being one, that are working on synthetic fuels that have zero emission. And again, these are alternatives. Now, I think based on some things I've read and watched, is hydrogen fuel cells might become the solution for the heavy equipment industrial side of things. Think of like earth moving equipment, big machinery, where batteries are going to be way too heavy and way too expensive. And hydrogen, right? It produces what? Water vapor as emissions. That may be the solution there. So my only comment here is, we're gonna make a huge investment into this infrastructure. And if a better idea comes up, will that idea get squashed because we as a society and government said, no, we're going all in over here. And if something else comes along, right, we'll kind of squash that because, gosh, we can't pivot. We just spent all this money over here to go pivot to something else. So that's what I worry about a little bit. Are we really running to this is the solution and we're not thinking about what are some alternatives? Now I'm going to go over and let's talk about the gasoline, the combustion engine side. So as I did before, we'll do pros and cons. So pros is there's currently, right, there's abundant fueling stations all around. So the whole range anxiety, all that stuff, it's easy, right? We can go pretty much anywhere and get gas. It's convenient, no long distance anxiety. It creates, for someone like me, it creates a visceral driving experience. Well, it's the sound of that engine, the exhaust note, you're driving, it just feels alive. It feels like you're becoming one with the machine that's kind of alive, as opposed to I'm just sitting in this thing and going for a ride. The vehicles, again, sports cars, currently are lighter and they may be a little more agile feeling. So from a sports car enthusiast, they're probably going to be a little bit more fun to drive. There's plenty of independent repair shops, right? You can get your car fixed almost anywhere, and you yourself, if you like turning wrenches, you can work on those cars as well if you want to. And then as I mentioned earlier, they're less expensive to insure. So there's a few of the pros. Now let's talk about some of the cons. Based on the time that I'm making this video, one of them is that fuel is getting expensive. Now, I could be a cynic and say, is that intentional? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Obviously not as clean as electric, although I found a thing on the EPA Gov website that said that the gasoline-powered cars today are 99% cleaner in pollutants than the cars were in the 1970s. And then they do require more maintenance. Currently, they require more maintenance than EVs, right? You got to do oil change. You got to, do the spark plugs. There's a few more things that need more maintenance, and so therefore they're a little bit more expensive to maintain. I'm going to say that gasoline powered cars aren't going away anytime soon. So as much as people like to say that, oh, they're all going to be gone, they're not going away anytime soon. I know there's countries and there's people making a commitment that we're no longer going to sell gasoline powered cars, by 2030, by 2035, by 2040. But what's out there is going to be there for a while. And I think it's 50 plus years before we think we're ever going to get to an all EV society. I think there's always going to be an enthusiast component for gasoline powered cars. I mean, there's a lot of neat collectible cars out there. There's a lot of cool cars that collectors, etc., they're going to want to drive. Now, there might be limited places where they can get fuel. The fuel may be really expensive. But when cars came, horses didn't go away. So I suspect EV comes, battery comes, gasoline powered cars are not going away. My other thought is, why do we have to replace or get rid of all these gasoline powered cars? Remember I said earlier this idea of hybrid thinking? Why can't you have a society that's both? Well, it might be 80 EV, 20% gas, or 90-10, but why is it that we have to get rid of them all? Maybe what we should do is focus on, if we feel that older cars are more pollution, maybe give off more pollution. Maybe there should be some process to, help people get those older cars off the road, get a newer, more efficient gasoline powered car, or a less expensive EV car. For me personally, I would purchase an EV car for my family. It makes sense. You think about, running to the groceries. We're going to go out to dinner and grab something. Other errands that you have to run, they're all done within 25, 30 miles from my house. In that case there, I think EV makes perfect sense. I would have no problem owning an EV in that case. And I would even suspect that maybe one of the next family cars we get probably will be an electric vehicle. But a gasoline powered car for the fun and things or longer distances to drive is probably always going to be in my garage. So there you have it, my opinions on combustion engine and EVs. What are your thoughts? Where do you stand on this? Do you have a preference, EV or combustion engine? Let me know. Put it down in the comments below, and let's have a discussion. Let's have an exchange down in the comments on this particular topic. Thanks for watching this video. Do give this video a like, and please subscribe to the channel because it does help us grow. There's also some car reviews coming up soon. They're still a few weeks away, but stay tuned for those car reviews, as well as stay tuned for a big announcement I have that'll be coming up in just a couple of weeks. Hey everybody, thanks for watching, and as always, stay healthy and stay safe.